All right, my friends, we are here again today, back on the Intuitive Eating Principles series, and we are here to discuss principle number 3, which is maybe the scariest principle that any of my clients face. And I would bet for a lot of people who get into intuitive eating, they can get on board maybe with ditching diet culture, they can get on board with honoring hunger and fullness, and then they hit the Make Peace with Food chapter and they go, oh, wait a second. So I want to break down why the Making Peace with Food chapter and principle for the intuitive eating framework is so challenging to us, why it feels so scary, and then get into some steps so that you know how to take this on when you're ready for it. So the first thing that we have to know about making peace with food is that it is literally giving yourself permission to eat whatever you want, whenever you want, however much you want of it, and then just moving on with your life. Wouldn't that be great? Would that be just magic if you could trust food in that way? Well, one of the ways that I try to explain why it's so hard to trust food in that way is with my clients, I'll talk about the elastic band metaphor. And so what you have to imagine is in the presence of disordered eating behaviors or restriction or dieting, what we think of as pulling back an elastic band. That kind of represents your willpower, cognition, all the thinking and planning and counting and everything that you have to do to maintain that calorie deficit, most likely to somehow control your eating or somehow control your body. So we're pulling this elastic band back. The tension of the elastic band represents the tension in your body. So as you're cutting and reducing calories, your body is growing and growing in its need and desire to make up for the food that it's not getting. And so at some point, we pull to a point where we can no longer hold it. The restriction becomes too difficult, the diet gets too hard, the eating disorder behaviors are too hard to manage, and we let go. And when we let go, an elastic band will flip to the other side, oftentimes with the intensity of the restriction in the first place. And so on that side, in the opposite place of restriction, dieting, eating disorder behaviors, we find compulsion, unplanned eating, anxiety around food, but in a very different way, eating past fullness, eating in a way that doesn't feel authentic, and generally feeling like your body is not in control. If you don't feel in control of food, how can you ever make peace with it? This is the crux of why making peace with food is so hard. In our culture, so many of us are either struggling with disordered eating or wanting to improve our body image in some way. And so we're on this side of the elastic band. And if we're here restricting or dieting or counting, we can't ever trust food because the moment we let go, we're going over the deep end. So the other two things we have to understand about the elastic band metaphor that I think really bring it home are, number one, the physiological deprivation. And that is what is happening when you're pulling back this band. You're restricting your body of calories, cold, hard energy that your body requires to get through the day. And so your body goes into a place of suppression or fight or flight, or other ways to think about physiological distress. So you may be actively fighting hunger during this phase, stomach grumbling, and figuring out all these different ways to avoid actually eating food. So you might be filling your stomach with low-calorie foods. You might be going for popcorn or fruits or vegetables, or you might be doing water, you might be chewing gum, all these other ways that you're trying to suppress your appetite, and in reality, you're starving. And maybe you don't feel necessarily the hunger cues, but maybe your body's showing you in a different way. You might be feeling really low energy. You might be needing to nap in the middle of the day. Maybe you actually can't even stay asleep. You might find that you're waking up constantly, tossing and turning and not feeling restful. You may be getting headaches all the time. You might be noticing your hair falling out. You might be noticing that, like, oh, I haven't gotten my period in a couple months. There are all these ways that your body is physiologically deprived and trying to show you that it actually needs more food. So in that way, we definitely can't make peace with food because your body right now is at war with the restriction that's being implemented on it. And then the other thing that goes along with this is your psychological deprivation. So psychological deprivation has to do with all the rules that we make up about food, the things that are allowed and the things that are not. And oftentimes we keep narrowing and narrowing and narrowing the amount of allowed foods while we're restricting or in eating disorder behaviors or on a diet. And what happens is over time, we develop intense psychological deprivation to foods that we otherwise normally love, like pasta or bread, or enjoying cake at a birthday party, or ice cream, or other foods that we typically think of as off limits in a diet. And so the moment that you let go of the elastic band and you shoot to the other side and all the rules are out the window, your mind paradoxically wants to go to exactly the food that you were trying to restrict. Creating deprivation is ironically always going to create chaos in your relationship to food. So that's the deprivation setup, and that's why so many of us cannot trust our relationship with food. So let's talk about some of the things that we need to step through in order to overcome this. So the first thing you need to do to overcome your deprivation and allow some space into making peace with food is go back to principle number one. You have to ditch dieting. At least for now, if not forever, you have to make a commitment to yourself that you are no longer going to manipulate your food for reasons about body image, body size, body shape, etc. You got to give that up if you want to have peace with food. If you are always looking at something in front of you and wondering, is this going to make me gain weight? Is this going to make me lose muscle? Is this going to make me look in a way that I don't want to? You're never going to be able to make peace with food. There's still that fear. There's still that mistrust. So the body image stuff has to go away for the moment. It has to separate from how you're eating, and it has to be maybe dealt with or managed in a different way. So that's the first piece. The second thing that we have to do to make peace with food is to go back to principle two. So making peace with food is only going to be successful, I hope this is clear, when you are feeding your body adequately. So figuring out how to return to normal, appropriate hunger and fullness cues, like we talked about in the second principle, getting on a schedule if you need to, trying to eat every 4 to 5 hours, including snacks throughout the day, and really trying to listen to when your body's hungry, feed it what it needs, ideally a full, complete meal, and then really look to feel fullness at the end of a meal, as opposed to feeling like you've had just enough. So if you are consistently over a long period giving your body adequate food, you're getting rid of the deprivation, both physiologically and a little bit psychologically, but we're going to get there. We have a couple other steps to really, really combat psychological deprivation. So the next piece we want to add to this is that you have to accept, or at least entertain, that there is no such thing as a good or a bad food. There's no such thing as a healthy or unhealthy food. There are only healthy and unhealthy relationships with a food. There's no one food on a plate in front of you today, every night this week, every night this month, that's ever going to do anything bad to you. Honestly, I promise you. A lot of the fears that we have around particular foods and whether they're going to cause us illness or sickness or end us up with long-term lifestyle-related diseases, a lot of those fears are incredibly unwarranted because all of those types of conditions that develop take decades, years, often have a lot of genetic components, and are certainly not just related to the food that we're eating. Those types of conditions are often multifaceted. They have to do with many different lifestyle factors, and as I said, sometimes a huge genetic component. So looking back at the food on your plate, if you can warm to it and come to it with a more appropriate and loving and accepting relationship, and if you are fully physiologically satisfied, you are much less likely to eat that food in a way that's unhealthy. So accept that there are no good and bad foods. Consider that if you work on them one at a time, and we'll go through a practice in a couple weeks to help you do that, you can overcome the intensity of relationship that you might feel with foods that you've always classified as bad. And you can move through that and make peace with those foods one at a time. And finally, the last piece to making peace with food. This is a big one. There is no need for you ever to have punishment or penance for anything that you've eaten. There's no need to compensate. There's no need to fix yourself. There's no need to do anything in response to anything that you've eaten. Your body's going to do that for you. If you, for example, have eaten more than you plan to, You're out with friends, you're enjoying yourself, you're eating past fullness because it's a great night and you're happy and you love the food that's in front of you. Your metabolism is going to kick in. It's going to increase over the next 24 to 48 hours, and it's going to burn those extra calories right off. And then it's going to come back to baseline. Similarly, if you were really busy for the day, you're not feeling well, and you didn't quite get enough to eat, your body is going to kick up your appetite. It's going to kick up some of your cravings towards foods, maybe that day, maybe a couple days later. But overall, your body's going to increase your appetite, you're going to eat more food, and your metabolism is going to come back to baseline again. Your body has been honing an energy regulation system for literally thousands of years. It's been maintaining this the whole time before we ever decided in our brains that we needed to diet or control any of this. Your body knows how to manage its own energy regulation system, and you do not require, or it does not need, any sort of compensation or punishment or having to go to a gym because you ate X thing, like none of that. You don't have to do any of that. The reason this gets thrown off to begin with is not because of the food environment, which is an argument I hear a lot. We're in this crazy food environment with all this delicious food, and food scientists have hacked our brain and know how to make us eat in a way that we can't control ourselves. And I think to some extent there's maybe some merit to those arguments, but I think more likely we live in a culture that really values a thin, small body. And for most of us, probably 90% of us, we're not naturally in a thin, small body. And so many of us have to get on the deprivation train, go on a diet, and start trying to reduce calories and get that thin, small body, as opposed to just accepting our body the way it is, being the way we are, and calling it a day. And so in that place where so many people are in restriction and deprivation, and then they're in a food environment where there's tons of access to what we think of as like unhealthy or quick and easy or not whole food, type foods, we then see that there's a lot of lack of control around those foods. So my argument is, and the argument of intuitive eating is, if you can relax into a more appropriate and adequate relationship with food, it is possible to make peace with foods, even the ones that have hacked your brain for science and profits. So that's our pitch for making peace with food. I hope some of these tips have helped you work through some of maybe your fears around starting this. And like I said, we'll be doing a video in a couple weeks that will walk you through an exercise on how to start making peace with some foods that maybe feel a little bit too activated for you. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.